Well, essentially, Mixed Match is the name of this upcoming documentary I'm putting together. And it really looks at sort of the complexities that multi-ethnic people or people of mixed race experience when they're trying to find bone marrow matches if they have diseases such as leukemia. And it gets quite complex because it's all based on genetics and DNA, that when they start to mix, we become more blended and it becomes more complex to find similar matches when you're trying to find someone that's very similar to you for your bone marrow. And so we're trying to raise the awareness to get people to kind of understand how this works, hopefully encourage people to join the bone marrow registries, and really just kind of go out and be proactive about learning more about this kind of stuff.
It's bittersweet because I think about some of the patients that don't end up having a good ending, and it's even worse when you know there's a cure out there but you just can't grasp it. It's like, it's elusive.
I was born and raised in Kelowna, British Columbia. Basically, I grew up in an orchard, which was owned by my Japanese-Canadian grandparents. And my Japanese-Canadian side of the family has a long history of actually working in the orchard business. And they've been farmers and planters. I think my great-grandfather came over in 1907. And my grandfather, Harry Chiba, was born in Fintry. My grandmother's side grew up in Vernon. And so during the war, the internment, there was no, we weren't interned during that period. So, because we were in the interior of British Columbia. And so farming has always been a big part of my family. Some of my grandfather and his parents worked at the Coldstream Ranch in Vernon during that time, during the war. And then my grandfather came out to here, Vancouver, and lived in Japantown for a bit, but came back just before the war. So, and that's something that my history and heritage, I never really knew a lot about being a young kid from Kelowna, because essentially growing up being mixed in Kelowna, it was kind of an interesting experience, right? Because, you know, it was a pretty Caucasian kind of place, right? There was a few Japanese families here and there. There was a few other sort of ethnic minority families in the area as well. But being mixed Japanese, I always felt like I was that minority kid in the class because, you know, part of me was that. And that's what a lot of kids would focus on. So that really influenced a lot of the work that I've done in film and in my art, is that a lot of the filmmaking and a lot of the documentary work and the animation work is very identity-based, and it looks at exploring the sort of issues surrounding being multi-ethnic, being mixed race. And so I like the idea of exploring my multi-ethnic identity in my work. And not just that, but exploring other people's. So that becomes a topic for me of huge importance. Because I think when I create these films, I want to create that dialogue, and I want people to create sort of a discussion based around talking about identity. Because for me, I didn't grow up talking about identity. I knew that here are my Japanese Canadian grandparents, here are my German, Russian, British, Scottish grandparents over here. And you know, even in my Japanese Canadian household, in my grandparents' house, I only ate sushi maybe once a year at New Year's, right? It was a really special occasion to eat sushi. Other than that, they were very Western, right? But I always knew that, you know, my grandparents had their sort of Japanese sort of items in the house, and I knew that they were Japanese Canadian. I knew that my grandparents on this side were of a an European background, right? And sort of being in between that, right, was kind of, I think, for anyone who's multi-ethnic, kind of like feeling divided almost, right? It's like, okay, well, when I'm here, but I don't feel quite as Japanese as my grandparents. But at the same time, it's appreciating both your sort of duality, right? But also appreciating being Canadian. And I think that's something that comes into play as you get older and you start to reflect and you start to realize certain aspects of your own identity. And I think that's something as a kid that you know, started to develop early on and seeped into my artwork eventually as well. You know, growing up, I made a film, my first film to explore that was called What Are You Anyways? And it was about being part Japanese growing up in Kelowna. And it was about all those funny, weird, crazy experiences that you experience being raised in a small Canadian town or city, being someone of multi-ethnic background or Japanese descent. And some of the names that you get called, some of the weird scenarios you find yourself in. And then as you get older, how you start to appreciate that aspect of your life, and finding that you need to find a safe place to discuss that with parents, family, and friends that sometimes I didn't do, right? And I probably would have really appreciated that opportunity. So, yeah. Moved to Vancouver after high school to go to Emily Carr Institute of Art and Design. There I studied animation. I got into filmmaking because the animation program was all about making films. And so it made sense for me when I graduated not to just go into the industry right away. I decided I would go off, do my own animated films. I did some teaching as well, taught college animation. As well, now I run a boutique animation studio, which is called Meditating Bunny Studio Incorporated. And we do a lot of commercial work for clients like 3M, Post-its, Sharpie. So that kind of is another aspect to my creation, is working in the commercial realm. Meanwhile, these other films like Mixed Match, One Big Happy Family, they become passion projects. And they become passion projects because, when I leave this earth, I'm hoping that these films will still exist and will help inspire and to help capture a moment in our history when things were starting to shift, right? Our society became more blended. And so I want to kind of be at the cusp of that to try to explore how do we perceive our identities now, at this time in our lives, right? And how is it that this generation, this time now in the year 2000, did this generation perceive their identity? Because it will shift. In 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 50 years from now, we're going to have a mixed race majority, right? Over time, that these issues will not even be relevant anymore, right? And so what I'm hoping to do is just to capture this time in history and to show this is, with a film like Mixed Match, who knows, tomorrow there could be a cure. This could all be moot, right? What I'm doing now could just become, old, right? But at the same time, we are capturing a moment in time that's happening now, and these stories have to be told now, and we have to go out and film this stuff now, right? This film isn't waiting for me, right? Even though we don't have all the funding, if something happens tomorrow, or something that happened on the weekend, I had to be out of town to go shoot something, right? And I had other stuff to do. This film doesn't wait for me, right? So I think that's what it is that we just have to, we're always filming, keeping filming, which is why, any support we can get from people helping us really makes this stuff possible. So yeah, that's the journey we're going on right now.
They did the bone marrow biopsy and they came back with a definitive diagnosis of severe aplastic anemia. They also said your best shot at a long-term survival is through a bone marrow transplant. And that's when ethnicity came into play. That's when I was told, because you're half Chinese and you're half Caucasian, and your kind of ethnic mix is so rare, that the chances of you finding a match are 1 in a million.